Hey, it's Ethan.
Oh, hey, you alright? You just disappeared the other night.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm good. It's Mia. She's not dead. She's alive. She's back.
The first video game that introduced me to this ever-growing series was Resident Evil 5. I remember playing it once in my relative's house. From my experience playing this game at a young age, I found the game very difficult to play. Before Resident Evil, I used to play Call of Duty, and I never really paid attention to how much ammunition I was using to take down an enemy. To be honest, Call of Duty seemed like it was giving me an edge since I always had enough ammo to get through a mission, which really wasn't a bad thing. But playing Resident Evil 5 as a new player, this was a different kind of game that I never really experienced before. I was introduced into a new genre of gaming, and it was survival horror. This was when I was really introduced to the survival horror genre on video games, especially the horror part. Dead Rising is a survival horror game, but in this game, you always had enough space to run away from the enemy. Even in large parts where you were crowded, there were ways to escape from them. But for RE5, you can easily get surrounded by the zombies in the corners without ammo, and you don't have nowhere else to run to. And then you get stuck, and then you immediately die. To this day, I hadn't really gone back to playing RE5. RE6 though was a completely different story. In my opinion, I found the game manageable and pretty fun to play. This game was mostly action based instead of survival horror. Most of the main characters from the previous games came back in a huge game. It actually reminded me of the Avengers, but with Resident Evil characters. It was awesome that you can get to play the 4 playable characters' point of views. They all had their own missions and goals you can play through, and I believe that the creators for RE6 did really well. So why am I referencing RE5 and 6 since this is supposed to be a video about Resident Evil 7? Well, my friend, before learning how to play these past survival horror games before RE7 came out, has prepared me well to play this game. Not just only the Resident Evil franchise, but titles like Outlast, Alien Isolation, The Evil Within, Dead Space, Until Dawn, and The Last of Us are all great games that were preparing me for Resident Evil 7. I gotta say, when I first saw the demo play out for RE7, when it was first announced back in 2016, I was already intrigued. There was another video game that was going to come out around that time frame, but it was never published. You guys might have heard of it. It's called PT. It was going to be Hideo Kojima's next project that he was working on for the longest, but things weren't working out with Konami and him, and so they canceled the game, and the game never saw the daylight since. Lots of people were comparing Resident Evil 7 to PT in a good way and also in a bad way. Everyone at the time was hyped to see a similar game like that, a first-person video game and exploring a haunted house with little to no light in the dark. It was the perfect time for this video game to come out. Lots of people found the first person perspective to be a terrible move for the Resident Evil franchise. Since the first game came out on the PlayStation on March 1996, every Resident Evil game has used a third person perspective. The camera always sitting behind the character as the horror unfolds in front of their eyes. Now, for the first time in 20 years, the camera shifted to a first-person perspective. To be honest, since I never really finished a Resident Evil game before RE7, I was one of those people that didn't mind the first-person perspective. On January 24, 2017, Resident Evil 7 was finally released to the world. With every game ever made, there were steps that the creators needed to take into creating this outstanding game. Resident Evil 7's team started coming together on January 2014, but production didn't begin until February of that year. They took a new direction of the game by changing the camera to first-person view and keep a really strong focus on horror. On the past Resident Evil games, they have changed how the camera looks. From Resident Evil 1 through 3, the camera was at a fixed angle. They described the fixed camera as feeling a sense of helplessness or challenge, so the player can feel scared or even anxious. I played Resident Evil 0 before, and I can tell you that I did not like the camera staying in a fixed position. I always prefer the third person view when the camera is behind the characters and you can actually move the camera with the right stick on your controller. For Resident Evil 4 through 6, they changed the camera to third person view. It gave the player new enemies to match the new direction they were going with for the gameplay. It was basically more action oriented than horror. And with RE7, they wanted to go with the first person perspective so they can start with something fresh and new for the series. I didn't even know that during this presentation, they revealed that the reason being there was no co-op mode in RE7 was because they wanted to keep the experience of the game more personal to the player. The past games had a co-op mode where you can play simultaneously with a friend, but not on this one. Evil Dead was the primary example they have said that inspired the developers into creating this project. They narrowed down the focus on one setting, which was the house, and just a few characters. They didn't want to make the game driven by the character's story, but mostly by the experience the player goes through. That is why they really tried to make this game as very scary as they could, and I believe they succeeded. In the development process, they went back to the roots of what made Resident Evil Resident Evil. They went back and stated that the zombies, the unknown characters in the story, and the mystery of what's happening in the game is what they came up with while still planning for RE7. The Baker family are the main antagonists of RE7. Since the developers were planning to make 4 to 5 main villains in the story, they instead decided to make all the main villains in the story as a family. They incorporated elements of the horror subgenres into each of the family members. For the father, who is named Jack in the video game, they included elements of slasher films like Michael Myers when he is after the people he wants to kill. For the mother's character, whose name is Margaret, they wanted the player to feel disgusted or feel uncomfortable at times when facing her. Her limbs and body were mutating while facing her, and it was something that was really frightening to see up close in first person perspective. For the son Lucas, they used elements of psychological horror when going up against him. The best examples for psychological horror is the Zamora franchise. There was this one part where you needed to play a game to live. If you didn't pass it, then you would have died. These are all types of subgenres for horror. The main purpose is to scare the player, and I think they did really well with the Baker family. To know horror, the developers had to watch horror films together or go to haunted houses or even explore haunted scary locations so they can get in the right headspace of creating RE7. Since the game took place in Louisiana, the team got to go over there and explore places. They also took reference photos so they can use later while actually making the environments and the level designing of the game. On April 2015, the team were in full production mode. They got the characters, their reference photos of Louisiana, and their passion to make this game come to life. The team couldn't delay the game if they wanted to. The higher-ups set up high standards for them, and it was time to make it happen. When this video game was revealed on E3 in 2016, the world was shocked. The last Resident Evil game came out in 2012. 4 years later, a new RE game was right around the corner. What I really like about Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is how they created the environments in the video game. Everywhere you explore in the game was really thought out really well. Remember how I mentioned that playing other survival horror video games has prepared me to play this one? Well, it actually somewhat did. You can never really be ready with everything until you're actually doing it. I wasn't prepared for all the scary parts that I was about to experience. The first time I saw this game being played out was when I went to my cousin's house. We played it through and we were both experiencing this new game. We were both having a blast trying to figure it out how to get to the next part in the game. It was hilarious when we both got scared at the part where Jack found us and we had to run away from him and immediately hide. Fast forward a few months later, I saved enough money to buy one copy for myself. And when I played it, yeah, I was scared still. But that's what made the game really fun. I like that throughout the course of the game, you are limited number of slots where you can add your weapons, your supplements, and all that good stuff when you're down, and even importing items that you need to get past a certain location. I gotta say, this part was sort of challenging, but I got through it. Ammo was key for this game. If you didn't have enough bullets to take down an enemy, then you had to fight through using a pocket knife the officer in the video game gave you. My favorite part overall was the first boss fight you had with Jack. You had to use a chainsaw to fight him. Meanwhile, he was trying to hit you with his weapon. Did you notice I said the first boss fight for Jack? Yeah, he came back again for round number 2, but this time he was mutated. For me, this fight was the hardest one out of all the boss fights in the game. Shooting at the eyes with your guns took some time to get used to, and you kept running out of ammo very quick. I actually died several times on this part, maybe like 4 to 5 times, I'm not sure. It was quite a lot though. The puzzle solving in the game was a nice feature they included. They weren't very hard nor too easy to solve. They were fun to play. There was one time where I put a random object in a puzzle piece to see if the object actually fit, but once I exited out from there, they gave me a trophy that it actually said "nice try," indicating that the object I was trying to put in was wrong. Capcom has some good humor. The part where you get locked in a room with no escape from Lucas was where puzzle solving outshined the most in RE7. Before you enter the room, you somehow found a VHS tape hidden in a closet. The title of the VHS tape was titled "Happy Birthday." And since you're trying to figure out what this tape was about, you go to the nearest TV you find on the house and play it on the VCR. Man, do you remember those times when VCRs were so popular back then? Anyways, I like that they included multiple video cassettes to show you things that happened in the past. It also showed parts that the characters were going through. On the Happy Birthday tape, it showed everything I needed to know before Ethan, the main character, goes through the room. And if you didn't watch the tape, you would have failed again and again. Clancy, the cameraman who was part of the film crew that came to visit the house earlier before Ethan, was the guy you were playing as on the Happy Birthday tape. He suffered the most gruesome death in the game. He was burned alive. You actually get to see his corpse after you face off a huge swamp monster creature in the barn. If you read some of the notes and papers around the game, you get to read important documents that will help you understand what the Baker family does, and it was also giving you clues that will lead up to your next main objective. Overall, this game was so much fun to play. I had beaten it like 4 times already. There was one time where I played it in the hardest difficulty. It was called Madhouse, and I immediately regretted playing it, but it was still fun though. Games like this that focus on story and guiding the character on the main objective and having like some type of mood in their environments should be more appreciated. In the year 2015, they started development with this video game, and every person who was a part of making this game happen did a fine job. With this in mind, I can't wait for what they'll bring for Resident Evil Village once it's out. At this point in time, we're not that actually far away from it, and I can't wait to get my hands on the next installment of the Resident Evil series. In my books, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard has been one of the best games I have played from the last decade. And I'd just like to say to Capcom, thank you.